Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Tim McGuinness. I'm a director of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, and welcome to our SCARS Weekend webinar. This video is being recorded and it will be played back publicly. This is a public presentation. This is copyright 2022 Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. Today, we're going to talk about an interesting subject called justice. And this is a particularly difficult topic for many. So rather than sit here and look at my face, let's jump into our webinar and begin talking about this topic. Again, leave your camera and your microphone off. If you have any questions, you can ask them during the chat. This is a public presentation. Thank you. All right, let's talk about justice. Justice is a very interesting topic for every scam victim because, frankly, everyone wants to receive justice and feel that they have received justice. As I said, this webinar is presented by SCARS, the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scam, and I am Dr. Tim McGuinness. What do we mean by justice? The dictionary says a whole bunch of nonsense that's difficult to understand, but essentially that justice is the impartial process of determining guilt and innocence, of addressing conflicting claims, or the assignment of merit in such a conflict that might result in assignment of penalty or punishments. And that's all true, but for most people, the concept of justice is much, much more personal. It's a question of revenge or retribution. Because frankly, when something happens to us, somebody has to pay. It doesn't matter whether it's an automobile accident or whether someone is injured during surgery, whether someone assaults you, someone breaks into your home, someone murders someone that you know, or whether you're the victim of fraud, someone has to pay. We all sense this, we all feel this need for retribution, this need for revenge. But that's the problem. What is real justice for scam victims? Because there's obviously limitations associated with what can and cannot be done. Did you know, for example, in the constitutions of most of the Western nations, and that includes the United States, Germany, Canada, and many other countries, there's a great deal of language that's related to the concept of justice. Justice for those accused of a crime. But unfortunately, there is no justice for those individuals who are the victims of crime, as defined in our constitutions. So we have all of these protections for individuals accused of a crime, but in the constitutions codified in the central laws of most of Western democracies, there's no explicit rights for the victims of crime. Now, one of the exceptions of this is in the Rome Statute, which establishes the International Criminal Court. And the International Criminal Court was explicitly defined to protect the victims of crime, primarily focused on war crimes, atrocities, etc., but wired into that notion was the notion of victims having certain rights. Now, there are different kinds of justice, and we're going to talk about that a little bit for a moment. For example, there is the notion of utilitarianism, utility forms of justice. This means that there are consequences for crimes or things that are done outside of the law. This means that punishment is forward-looking. That is to say, that when someone is adjudicated, someone is judged to having been guilty, there is the concept of punitive, forward-looking justice to try to reduce the future occurrence of that particular kind of crime or action. There is also something called retributive justice, which deals with appropriate, proportionate response to the crime proven by lawful evidence, and that the punishment is justly imposed and considered as a morally correct and fully deserved act. Now, this is important because this is essentially the basis of Western justice, which is to say that there is a process by which individuals are accused, investigated, arrested, and adjudicated or judged so that a court and the processes of the court can determine if the individual is guilty and can define a suitable punishment based upon what society has decided, in other words, laws. Now, there's another kind of justice, which is retaliation or retaliatory justice. This is one of the cornerstones of military theory, which is to say that there is a reciprocity equal to the wrong suffered, a life for a life, a wound for a wound, stripe for a stripe. That is to say that if you are attacked, you will retaliate. Now, unfortunately, this is the biblical eye for an eye. And what we have seen historically over time is anytime anyone attempts to take an eye for an eye, all it does is result in endless escalation. Justice needs to be impartial and retributive, not retaliatory. Otherwise, the families of the accused will then take out their retaliation on the families of the accuser, and it goes in an endless spiral. Restorative justice. This is an old concept, but is very much a part of our current criminal justice system in many places around the world. So it's not so much concerned with retribution and punishment as it is with making the victim whole and reintegrating the offender into the society afterwards. So this is the concept where a criminal will serve a period of time, and then there are mechanisms that allow them to reintegrate into society. This is also how victims and offenders are frequently brought together so that the offender can be better understood and the effect that they had on their victims, and also so that victims can be understood. We see this, for example, in the justice practice of allowing victims to create and present impact statements in a court of law. So what do scam victims want? Now, we've dealt with millions of scam victims over the course of the last 7 years, something approaching 8 million victims at this point in time. So we have heard from countless victims what they want when they talk about justice. Most victims believe that they want justice to prevent more scams. Utilitarian justice. They want to punish criminals, retaliation justice. They want to become whole again, restorative justice. They want to get their money back, also restorative justice. They want to live in a just world, retributive justice. And they want to feel safe, restorative justice. In other words, they want to restore their sense of safety in living in a just world. But what does justice really do in our world and in our society? And does it really right any wrongs? Many will argue that justice as we currently know it does not right any wrongs. It's not really restorative justice, although there are aspects of restorative justice that play out in courtrooms around the world. Victims obviously want to stop more scams and scammers. Victims want someone to solve the problem and save them. Scam victims, by their nature, look towards society and towards government for their salvation. Unfortunately, this is also quite dangerous because politicians around the world exploit this expressed concern, this, let's call it a weakness in society, and they actually want all people to be victims. Because if everybody is a victim, everybody is looking towards government for the solution. Many of the solutions, most of the solutions, are in fact in the control of the victim beforehand, before they became victimized, and to a certain extent, in the hands of victims after the fact. So, before we go on, let's talk about the reality of transnational organized criminals. Because we're talking about the context of romance scams, relationship scams, and their victims. Transnational crime is defined as a crime that crosses international borders, or where the criminal crosses international borders. The reality of almost all online crimes is that they're transnational in nature. That means that the criminals can be virtually anywhere in the world, whether it's Russia, whether it's Eastern Europe, whether it's China, whether it's Indonesia or Malaysia, whether it's in the Philippines, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in the Middle East, such as nation-state cyber criminals like North Korea or Iran or Afghanistan, or in our old friends in West Africa. Well, truthfully, anywhere in Africa. So the problem with transnational crime is if the victim is in one country and the criminal is in another, this creates immediate, almost impenetrable barriers towards the execution of justice. So now we need to talk a little bit about law enforcement, particularly global law enforcement. There actually is no such thing as global law enforcement. The United States has an office for drugs and crime, but it's not a police agency. It's a data gathering agency. All police are essentially local because by their nature, they are created, they are authorized, and they're funded by some locality. Now, that locality could be a city or a town. That locality could be a county or a region. It could be a state or a province, or it could be a country. All police are local. Now, there are certain police that are what are called first responders. Those are your local, your most local police. Those are the people that you talk to first. Calling the FBI makes sense in certain contexts when the crime transcends or extends beyond the local region. But the FBI is normally not a first responder. Your local police are. And the local police then are supposed to refer crimes based upon the jurisdiction. Although the FBI, Homeland Security, Secret Service, and others may step in automatically when they're notified. Their job, all law enforcement's job, is essentially to do three things. Take complaints, in other words, take a criminal report, a police report, to investigate the allegation in that report, in other words, investigate a crime, and make an arrest. They don't prosecute, they don't send people to prison. That's the job of the criminal justice system, in other words, the courts. All crimes must be reported to the local police. Then the local police should refer the crime. However, after that report is made and you have a police report number, then you can also notify, at your option, higher authorities, which might include the state cybercrimes police, provincial cybercrimes police, or also the FBI, FTC, or whoever it may happen to be. But it will typically be law enforcement's job to investigate if they feel there is merit and make an arrest. Now let's talk about a little more about this confusion between local versus national. We've already touched on that. Now let's talk about FBI versus FTC. The FBI is, in effect, the national police agency of the United States. Now, there's a problem when reporting to the FBI, because the FBI has a certain minimum threshold or certain types of crimes that they will investigate. When it comes to cyber crimes, cyber-enabled crimes, and let's talk for just a moment about the difference between those two. A cyber crime is any crime that is executed with any form of electronics, via the internet typically. A cyber-enabled crime is a term that was defined by the United Nations to talk about crimes that utilize computing or electronic devices, information technology, to enable a crime. Relationship scams, financial fraud, are cyber-enabled crimes. They're not true cyber crimes. A cyber crime could be ransomware, it could be a hack of a computer network, etc. Now back to the FBI and the FTC. The FBI is a single agency. It's what we refer to as a silo. When you make a report to the FBI, it goes into the FBI's buckets and does not come out. Because honestly, the FBI isn't great at sharing information. They don't automatically share with Secret Service, Homeland Security, other agencies, typically. Which is why SCARS no longer recommends that the FBI be your first choice for reporting crimes on the national level. We recommend that you report them through the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission is an agency of the United States government that is charged with regulatory compliance as it relates to crimes against consumers. And those can be crimes against individuals or crimes against businesses. SCARS is a Federal Trade Commission partner for its Sentinel reporting system. SCARS has a unique URL where you can report cyber-enabled crimes, scams, fraud, and related crimes, whether it's a phone scam, an email scam, a web-based scam, a chat-based scam, a relationship scam, lotto scam, whatever it happens to be, government impersonation, etc., with increased focus and attention. So our recommendation universally is report to the FTC first. If you also want to report to the FBI, welcome to do so. You can also report to the Secret Service and other agencies around the world. We recommend that you report all cyber-enabled crimes, regardless of the country in which you live, to the FTC, because they will share it with government, and This can benefit your country as well. Let's talk about Europol and Interpol. There's a great deal of confusion about these two entities. Europol is the equivalent of the FBI or the Council of Europe. In other words, the European Union. They are a law enforcement agency. Typically, they don't investigate directly, but they work with closely local national law enforcement agencies in Poland, Germany, France, etc. Interpol is not a law enforcement agency. They are an international body, a non-governmental agency or organization based in Europe, and they're headquartered in Singapore. Their job is to collect information and distribute it around the world. Now, they have liaison individuals or officers in countries around the world, but they are not a law enforcement agency. They don't investigate and make arrests. They aggregate information. Now let's talk about entities specifically related to scams, financial fraud, etc., like action fraud in the United Kingdom. And there are equivalent agencies like the Canadian Cyber Crime Center, Scam Watch in Australia, and many others. These are mostly governmental agencies. They are either a part of a regulatory body within the government, or they're part of a police agency. Action fraud is part of the Metropolitan Police of London, the United Kingdom. Reporting to them has the effect of filing a criminal complaint with the police. But this varies based upon the laws of the country. Your first choice should always be to report these crimes at the local level, except in Sharia law countries. Do not report these crimes in Sharia law countries because you place yourself at risk, especially women. You should never report these crimes in a Sharia law country, such as Saudi Arabia, for example, because by the mere act of engaging in a relationship scam, you may be breaking many local laws in these countries. In addition, there is a universal reporting mechanism that SCARS created many, many years ago called anyscam.com. We recommend that you also report all of these crimes to anyscam.com because anyscam.com provides a real-time feed of crimes reported to agencies around the world that receive our live feeds. Obviously, we want to punish criminals. We want to see them go to jail. We want to see them suffer in similar ways or to the extent that their victims suffer. But can we really do that as a society? And after all, what is punishment? So we see constantly cyber criminals, cyber-enabled criminals, criminals that engage in financial fraud, scams, romance scams. In Nigeria, for example, arrested in very large numbers. It's a miracle, the growth of law enforcement in Nigeria addressing these crimes. By contrast, we see virtually nothing happening in Ghana. I can't remember the last time that a cyber criminal was arrested in Ghana. But we see progress being made in neighboring countries like Ivory Coast. But what we typically see are that these criminals go into jail for 1 to 2 years, although we have seen sentences of as long as 20 years. Unfortunately, victims often are very angry about being the victim of these criminals. And victims want longer sentences. And this is certainly rational, and victims play a role in demanding longer sentences. But just ranting about it on some page on Facebook does absolutely no good. If you want to see longer sentences in Nigeria or wherever in the world, you have to communicate with the law enforcement agencies and the courts and the government of those countries. And that is within your right as a victim. Contact the ambassador of Nigeria in whatever country you're in and barrage them with demands that sentences are longer and more severe for these kinds of crimes. It can have an impact. Contact the government of these countries, their justice ministry, their foreign ministry, their presidency, and the law enforcement agencies. You have to be an advocate for yourself. And if you do that, you will see longer sentences. For example, one of the victims that participates in one of our support groups recently had an opportunity to appear in court in Dallas, Texas, to present a victim's impact statement to the court. The scammer, who was a West African, was in the courtroom. The victim was able to look at him and read her victim's impact statement so that he could clearly hear the impact that this has had on her life and her future. And while the scammer apologized, but that could be crocodile tears because of the fact that he was caught. However, the court listened to that impact statement and impact statements that were written by others and awarded sentenced this criminal to nearly the maximum available. The prosecution thought it was going to be something like a slap on the wrist. But in fact, this criminal was sentenced to 14 years in federal penitentiary for his crime. And when his 14 years are up, he faces a criminal investigation for immigration fraud and at a minimum deportation back to Nigeria, which is not the greatest country in the world if you are a criminal. So in a manner of speaking, we've started to see, particularly in Western countries, where sentencing is much, much more severe. But there's a problem. And the problem is that there are no crimes unless the crimes are reported. And the problem is that 99% of victims in Western countries, well, actually around the world, as far as we are able to determine, even the FBI estimates that it is well below 5%. The FTC reported last year that there were about 450,000 complaints made through the Sentinel reporting system. But that's the drop of the bucket, because 99% of victims do not report these crimes. The problem is essentially this. Government only can respond to what they know. And unless a crime is reported to them, it doesn't exist. They don't estimate or extrapolate. They don't have the freedom that SCARS has to use information from a multitude of sources to create an analysis, an extrapolation, an estimation of these crimes. We know in the United States last year that there were 18 million victims estimated by the money transfer services like Zelle, MoneyGram, Western Union, etc. Overall estimate of victims in the United States was about 30 million. We know that there were 5 million WhatsApp scam victims in Brazil alone. We estimate that the number of financial fraud victims, cyber-enabled victims worldwide, to be around 50 million for 2021. 1% or less worldwide have been reported. When victims do not report their crimes, criminals do not get investigated, criminals do not get arrested, criminals do not get judged and sent to prison. This is a problem. And it's a problem that only victims themselves can solve. Law enforcement can't solve this problem. They can't use a crystal ball and figure out, oh, this person is a victim and we're going to go and arrest their criminal based upon their crystal ball or their Ouija board. Victims must report these crimes. The complete failure of law enforcement in this regard isn't the failure of law enforcement, it's the failure of victims to report these crimes. Now, this may sound like victim blaming. It's an observation. We understand the incredible difficulty that there is with reporting these crimes. And we do everything in our power, both to educate victims on how to appropriately report these crimes in the least traumatic fashion possible, and also for law enforcement to show the appropriate compassion and respect for victims when they come in and do this. But it must be reported. Now, one of the things that we hear from virtually every victim is they want to get back what they lost. They want to recover their money. Is it even possible? This is a massive question. The answer is, unfortunately, most of the time, it's not possible. Because these criminals are expert at what they do. They're not some guy sleeping on a floor. They're professional, organized criminals. They work in teams. They have associates that manage the process of money collection and recovery. They have a network of money mules. When the money leaves your hands, whether it's by a money transfer service, the minute you've sent it, it can be recovered by the scammer. And the minute that they take it out of the money transfer account, it's gone and unrecoverable. And the money transfer agency, Zelle, Western Union, MoneyGram, they have no responsibility to you, partly because A, the money's gone, they have disclaimers in terms and conditions, but they also ask you a strategic question if you're a victim. Did you know this person? All scam victims lie. So in effect, the victim made it impossible for themselves to recover their money through the money transfer services because they were not truthful in the transfer of that money. Now, there were Federal Trade Commission actions against MoneyGram and Western Union. In the case of both of these programs are ongoing, but they related to the fact that previously these entities did not do a good enough job of disclaiming the risks associated with using their services or requiring the victims to declare that they knew the person. All right, so let's go back to this issue of money recovery. In most cases, if the money is sent by bank wire transfer and you're able to respond immediately, there is the option of being able to claw back or recall a wire transfer, but it must be done quickly and within certain circumstances. But it's very dependent upon where you are and the terms and conditions and willingness of your bank. For example, in the United Kingdom, victims are much more successful in being able to recover wire transfers than they are in the United States, for example. However, in the United States, there is also an overarching agency called the Federal Reserve Bank that does allow victims to file complaints against their bank for failure to appropriately stop and recover wire transfers. If you sent money via wire transfer, you're encouraged to file a complaint with the Federal Reserve. as a mechanism to try and force the bank to do a proper recall. Some victims can get certain amounts of money back, not everyone. So going into this, it's important to recognize that money recovery is mostly impossible. Now, there are money recovery services. Some of them, and I emphasize some, are legitimate companies that are incorporated in their state, their region, their province. Always verify if the person that you're talking to is an incorporated and licensed business. Generally speaking, this is not going to be successful. Again, generally speaking. We have worked with businesses in the past to try to develop a mechanism that would allow for the recovery of money, particularly money sent through money transfer services. Unfortunately, that occurred just prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic virtually destroyed the businesses that we were working with. So we're back at square one. Now, don't forget about money mules. And why is this important? When you file a criminal complaint, you should and must identify everybody who was involved in the crime, and that includes the people that you sent the money to. They may be in your same state, your same country, or in nearby regions. One of the things you may need to do is to file criminal complaints in the region where the money mule is. The challenge with money mules is that they're also victims who've been manipulated and controlled into doing what they're doing. Many times they have no idea, maybe most of the time they have no idea. Fortunately, this is the consequence of crime. The money mule is responsible. And what does that mean? Now, the police, once they've identified a money mule, will be reluctant to refer them for prosecution and arrest. However, as a victim, if you sent money to a money mule, you have the ability to file a lawsuit to obtain redress, recovery. Frankly, many money mules have no money. It's the reason they were turned into a money mule, is they gave all their money to the scammer, or they never had any to begin with. We can't advise you on whether or not you should sue a money mule or whether or not you would be successful. That's a question that each person has to answer for themselves. But it does remain an option. Now, victims want to feel whole again, to feel like the world makes sense to them. The police and the justice system are not really going to help you feel whole again. Unfortunately, this transcends their services. If all you wanted was revenge and the arrest of the scammer, and you felt that that was going to solve all of your problems, we're sorry to say it won't. It won't take away the trauma or the grief or the sorrow, the anxiety or the depression that came from being the victim of one of these crimes. The only way to get there, the only way to make yourself whole again, is through a commitment to recovery. SCARS provides recovery services, support groups, massive education to help victims recover from their experience. And SCARS strongly recommends that all scam victims seek out a local, competent trauma counselor or therapist. We all want to live in a just world where the bad guys go to jail and society takes care of its victims. However, this is not universally true. Unfortunately, there are elements in every country that likes people to be victims because then they are dependent upon them. Political parties specific governments around the world do not want free, thinking, aware citizens operating within their countries. They want everybody to be a victim of something. And it's important not to allow yourself to remain and stay a victim. You have to fight that victim mentality. Victims want to feel safe again and not afraid anymore. But do they do what is safe? Unfortunately, many victims, most victims, really do not change the things about them that enabled them to be a victim in the first place. And for this reason, victims are victimized multiple times over and over again. Not every victim, many, many victims are victimized only once. They're one and dones. However, there is a subset of victims who are victimized dozens of times because they haven't learned or changed their behaviors to avoid those risks. It's important that every victim learn why this happened, how it happened, who did it to them, and to change by gaining the knowledge, utilizing the experience that they've had, and changing their behaviors to reduce these risks in the future. Unfortunately, a full third of all victims turn to vengeance and vigilantism. They're angry. They hate scammers. There are entire quote unquote support groups online that call themselves scam haters. It's an apt description. They're hate groups that deploy their hate against scammers and also anybody that does not toe the line. And that includes the victims that are members of their group. Vigilantism in the world of scams involves relentless exposing of scammers without any real intent and purposes. They're exposing scammers so that people will not be victimized. This is completely unrealistic. It's yet another fantasy. Now, you can report scammers to the platforms that they appear on with the purpose of having those accounts and profiles taken down. That actually has value. But the constant exposing in public of scammers is nothing more than hate. Scam baiting, turning scammers into a play toy that victims can manipulate and deceive themselves. This is what scammers do. How does justice get served if a victim becomes what their criminal did to them? This is a complete abdication of ethics and integrity. There is no moral justification for scam baiting unless you are a law enforcement agency that is using it for the purpose of investigation and to arrest a scammer. Scam baiting results in nothing. It's a masturbatory exercise. It's an exercise of hate. Even if it's not recognized by the individual doing it, that they hate scammers, they're acting out their aggression through the act of scam baiting. Relentless hunting is another aspect of hate. Again, there are reasons for identifying fake profiles and accounts on social media for the purpose of shutting them down and interrupting their lines of communication between the scammer, the criminal, and the victim. The mistake victims often make is believing that they have to chase justice and vengeance. That pushes away their recovery. In effect, they substitute one set of emotionalism, the scam itself, for another: vengeance, retribution, hate. Anger takes control, and the need for vengeance consumes those victims. Anger and hate turn on those trying to help victims also. In other words, really angry scam victims are not going to be able to effectively communicate with the police or receive the benefit of those services. They're not going to be able to receive the full benefit of the criminal justice system. They're not going to be effective advocates for themselves. They turn on us. Anytime a victim disagrees with what we say, and we are the global experts, then SCARS is instantly a scammer. And they also turn against other victims, as we've seen countless times in amateur anti-scam hate groups. In the end, what really is justice? Most would say it's an attempt to interpret justice as requiring respect for the dignity of all persons as free, equal, rational, moral beings. At SCARS, we think justice for scam victims really is victims being respected, that everyone from law enforcement to the courts, to the prosecutors, to society, to their friends and families, appreciate the fact that they are the victim of organized crime and that they are respected implicitly, that they are heard, that they're given an opportunity, that the police give them an opportunity, that society gives them an opportunity. We certainly do, for them to be heard and tell their story. But it's also important for victims to understand that in order for themselves to be able to take advantage of this, they must tell their story. They must utilize their voice. Being afraid to do that is to remain trapped in the grips of the scammer. We see that no one has asked questions. If you want to ask a question, please feel free to do so. Now, also being accepted. This is a hard one because the nature of scams almost universally will result in some level of judgment. But in order to be accepted, victims must be able to communicate or point others at reliable messaging so that they can understand. We've addressed this in a variety of ways. We have numerous articles on our websites that help families and friends understand what this experience is all about, how scams work, and how victims were scammed, and what happens to victims after the fact. We publish our SCARS Slate book, which is specifically designed for family and friends. It's easy. Victims can buy it at relatively low cost and simply give it to family and friends and say, here, read this, where they don't have to have a conversation if that's too painful. By giving them the book, they don't have to go online and take time, and they simply will have the book in their hands. That's the objective behind it. Victims also need to be able to recover. Sadly, about 2/3 of all victims will not be able to recover, either because of denial or because they've settled in anger and cannot successfully interact with the process of recovery. Realists can recover, and it is extraordinarily hard. But yes, they can recover if they are committed to doing that. And they can live a happy life again. Now, one of the questions that we received from our audience is, in order to report a crime, do you need to know what country the criminal was from? No, you don't. You just need to report the act of the crime and provide the concrete information that you have available. You may not have much in the way of concrete information, but you sent money somewhere. You had communications with someone, someplace, On romancescamsnow.com, there is on the homepage in the section for new victims, a checklist for interacting with the police. This helps you understand what information is valuable to report to your local police, regardless of where the police are, regardless of where you are. And this will help you congeal that information down into something that the police can accept. They don't want to hear about all of the dialogue and the promises and the dreams. That's important to you, but it's not important to the police in trying to determine if they can investigate this crime. Is there a time limit for reporting to the police in your banks? The answer is no. There are what are called statutes of limitations on certain kinds of crimes. So if you were to report it 20 years later, statute of limitation probably has expired. Now, in the case of banks, it's important to report it as soon as possible. But there are other reasons why reporting these crimes is important. One is that as the victim of a crime, you are entitled to certain rights that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. So getting the police report number triggers the availability of victims' rights. There's no crime unless it's reported. If it was 4 years ago or 6 years ago, okay, maybe you won't report it. If the crime happened 2 years ago, reporting it to your bank probably has no value. You have to make a determination for yourself as to when it is appropriate still to report that. We can't give you legal advice in that regard, other than to say report it as soon as possible. According to the National Crime Victim Law Institute, we were talking about what justice means for crime victims. According to them, justice means something different for everyone, and we must ensure options and opportunities exist within our various systems for all crime victim survivors to be heard and treated with dignity. We think that this is the most appropriate definition of what justice is for a crime victim, whether the criminal is ever caught or whether they're ever judged. And this applies to all victims everywhere in the world and for all types of crimes. Victims want to know that society cares, respects them, and hears them. And we do our very best to adhere to those standards of ethics and integrity. Remember that victims also have rights. Working within the criminal justice system, on the FBI's own website, they have an extensive description of the victims' rights that victims have when reporting and working with the FBI. Unfortunately, they don't adhere to those rights, particularly when reports are received through ic3.gov. And in fact, SCARS filed a formal complaint through the Ombudsman and relative offices at the Department of Justice and the FBI to bring their attention to that gap. Victims have rights for emotional support. In the United States, through the Victims of Crime Act, there is compensation to states to enable victims to receive support and counseling free of charge. In other countries where they have more nationalized healthcare systems, counseling and therapy is provided as a part of those systems. If your country doesn't provide that, then you should be lobbying your government to make sure that victims' rights are identified and adhered to. Many places, particularly in the United States, have victim compensation funds, which can reimburse victims for certain kinds of financial losses. Additionally, in many places around the world, there is financial assistance for the victims of crime. You're encouraged to investigate what is available in your particular state, province, country, etc. Fortunately, there is no comprehensive list of these available at this time. As we mentioned, SCARS publishes many books relating to and supporting scam victims. Our Slate book is one of our color series that helps victims communicate about their crime to their families and friends in a non-confrontational, non-challenging way. SCARS also publishes numerous other books, such as our Blue Book, which is a victim's journal. We recommend that all scam victims, as a part of their recovery process, begin and maintain a journal, write down their experiences, their feelings, so that particularly as they progress through their recovery, they can look back and see how much they have changed over time. The SCARS Red Book is a organizer that organizes information about the crime. It's designed to capture every bit of information about each individual victim's crime experience. So in effect, you can fill in the Red Book and simply hand that Red Book filled in to the police officer, and they can get everything that they need to fill in a report, so that you don't have to go through the emotional experience of really telling your entire story. For many victims, that's quite traumatic. Our Green Book is a scam victim's self-help recovery program guide, so that you can go through recovery on your own, by yourself, if that's the direction that you choose. We publish workbooks, we publish more information available as well. We encourage you to take a look at the full series of books that SCARS publishes. All SCARS services are available for free. However, our publishing books are something separate. There is a cost, and we do ask for a nominal fee associated with that. You can see SCARS publishing books at shop.againstscams.org. 100% of all profit goes to help SCARS help more scam victims worldwide, and your generous purchase allows us to maintain our scam avoidance, support, and recovery services. For those of you who've purchased from our SCARS publishing stores, thank you. So at this point, we hear you. We've been listening to the victims of cyber-enabled crime for 31 years. We understand what's going on. We've helped more than 7 million, nearly approaching 8 million victims. We've helped over, at this point, or near 12,000 scam victims have gone through the SCARS STEPS recovery program and support groups. We understand scam victims. We're the only entity in the world that is focused on helping scam victims recover from these experiences. But we are a nonprofit organization and we need help. So we need the help of everyone to provide free services that we offer for scam victims worldwide. If you're able to, please donate to SCARS. It's quick and easy, and your generous gift will help us offer more services to scam victims. You can donate to SCARS at donate.againstscams.org. And if you have already donated to SCARS, thank you. It may not be a lot of money, but it helps. Learn and verify. Don't automatically trust anyone online. That includes SCARS. Verify who we are. You can visit againstscams.org and learn who SCARS is. You'll see our corporate registration information. You can look us up at the government of the state of Florida to verify our status. Report all scams to the Federal Trade Commission at the link here and at anyscam.com. So thank you for trusting us. At this point in time, what I'm going to do is open this up for question and answers. And if any of you have any questions, please put them in the chat. If you have any comments about whether you found this webinar to be useful, informative, stupid, please feel free and comment about that too. So while I'm waiting for you to type away, I'm going to talk a little bit about SCAR's support groups and the services that we offer. SCAR's is not a mental health care provider. Neither is SCAR's a legal services provider. We're not licensed attorneys. We're not licensed healthcare providers. We're not licensed financial providers. There's a question. Is there a book that police can get to enable them to learn how to treat victims, and can police departments order them? It's available on our corporate website as a pamphlet. It's available for free. You can download it and print it out and hand it to them. You can email it to them. But on our YouTube channel, we have a video, which is actually what we suggest that you share with your local police department. It takes 3 minutes for them to watch, and it is much more impactful than reading a pamphlet. So we suggest that if you have any interaction with your local police department, or even if you don't, go to their website, get their email address, and ask them to watch this video so that they can better understand the impact of these crimes on scam victims and how to better support them and interact with them. We think the video is far more impactful. I'm directly connected to approximately 1,000 police chiefs around the United States. We've unfortunately only had about a dozen who've seen the video, but part of our activity is to continue to promote this to the police chiefs in the United States. But by all means, be an advocate and make them aware of this, regardless of the country in which you live. Additionally, SCARS is a partner of the United States Department of Homeland Security for their Cybercrimes and Infrastructure Security Agency. And as such, they distribute our information to law enforcement agencies around the United States and around the world that are also interacting with them on this topic. We have given presentations to law enforcement agencies through DHS over the years and continue to do so. But the best way to do this is for you to look up on your local police department's website the contact information for your local police chief, Department of Internal Affairs, Department of Victim Affairs, or Victims Advocacy, and send the link to this video to them. You'll find it on the SCARS YouTube channel, which you can find a link to on romancescamsnow.com, as well as on most of the SCARS Facebook pages as well. Thank you for your comments. Any additional questions before we bring this webinar to a close? Maybe we need the Jeopardy theme while people are waiting, or excuse me, writing their final answer to Final Jeopardy. All right, since there are no more questions, I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar as our audience, and it will be presented on our various social media pages and our websites, as well as made available through our support groups. Thank you, everyone. Again, this is Dr. Tim McGuinness. I am a director of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams Incorporated. I'm also one of the founders. From day one, SCARS was founded as an international body by individuals from Singapore, Taiwan, the United States. I'm proud to say that our current board of directors includes individuals from many countries around the world, including many different professions. It is dominated by past victims, survivors, thrivers. The SCARS advisory board includes professionals, professional fraud fighters, in individuals with vast experience in criminology, victimology, and other sciences. So To learn more about SCARs, visit againstscams.org to learn more about scams, scammers, and for victims to learn how to recover, visit romancescamsnow.com. If you are so inclined, even though we recommend against it, if you want to see scammer photos, visit scamsonline.org, and please report all scams. Everyone, please report these crimes to the Federal Trade Commission at the link that we provided and at AnyScam. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. We appreciate your attention.